Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the Raid Starter Pack. So you're ready to tackle the Nether Spider. Well, welcome to the mid-game, and you are in for one of the toughest fights in Doom Tower. It's not that you're going to die to raw damage, but you might die to the sheer amount of poison. So let's talk about how to beat the Nether Spider. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the Nether Spider's abilities as well as ways to counter them, and then I'm going to showcase you a single team, but it's the concept of the team that is transferable to all levels and all difficulties of the fight with the Nether Spider. And before we get started, a quick disclaimer that the team I have to showcase you is tuned for stage 110 of hard, but it can be scaled appropriately back to wherever you are within your progression. So the Nether Spider, I mentioned that she had poisons in her kit, and boy does she. Starting with the A1's an AoE attack that will place poisons on all enemies for 4 turns, and she'll repeat the attack once for each minion without any active buffs. We'll come back to that a little bit later. And these poison debuffs notably cannot be resisted or blocked. So block debuffs will not help you, immunity sets and resistance will not help you. These will be going on no matter what. And if that wasn't enough for you, then she also has an A2 here, which will spawn 4 spiderlings if they're not alive already, and they'll have a counterattack on them for 3 turns, and then it is an ally attack, so she's bringing all the minions with her to attack, meaning that she will do the A1, placing the poisons, but of course all the minions have basically the same ability with the unblockable, irresistible poisons on an AoE, so you literally start off the fight, as you can see here, she'll start the fight by doing this ally attack, and so you start off with a bunch of poisons across your entire team for 4 turn duration. Her first passive is not the worst one, but the second one is definitely where things start to get a little bit tricky. So she'll counterattack whenever you try to decrease her turn meter, and the damage she inflicts will be proportional to the amount of turn meter lost. So if you do a big Cold Heart A3 slam, she's going to hit a lot harder, and it will ignore 100% of defense. And then the big kahuna in terms of her passives is this one here, where at the start of her turn, she'll just get a free AoE attack, and that does not count as her A1, so she will do that, and then she will A1 right afterwards, so 2 sets of attacks, and that first attack will deal damage from all poison debuffs on each enemy instantly. So you have poison explosion, so if you don't do anything about the poisons, she's going to be popping every poison across your team every single time she gets a turn. To make matters worse, whenever you attack the Nether Spider whilst under a poison, she will increase the duration of all debuffs on your team, meaning that you will increase the duration of all the poisons that you might have on yourself, and then you'll also get poison sensitivity placed on you, which amplifies the damage you take from said poisons. But fear not, if you attack her and you don't have a poison, she'll just throw one on you anyways, and that one also cannot be blocked or resisted. So poisons, and poison activation. Now, one very important thing that is not clearly stated in this boss guide here in the game is dealing with the minions and this counter attack. If you just straight up attack the spiderlings, you use an AoE attack ability and they counter attack, they will heal the Nether Spider by a ton and basically negate any and all damage that you have done. So generally, you're going to want to avoid champions who have an AoE on their A1 because that's their default skill and you can't turn it off. And then you might want to avoid using AoE skills on other champions. But generally speaking, the AI across a bunch of champions is smart enough that they will tend to favor their single target abilities once they get to the boss. However, you can also take advantage of this mechanic, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, because the Nether Spider is susceptible to the heal reduction debuff, which can prevent that healing. But of course, if you do get counterattacked by the spiderling minions, that means they will also be placing the irresistible, unblockable poisons on you, so you're still going to have to come up with some way to deal with that. But at this point, you might also be thinking, well, let me just get rid of the counterattack, let me just strip it off, which you most certainly can do. But if you do, that is where this part of the A1 comes into play. So if you strip off the counterattack, the spiderlings will have no active buffs, and then every single time the spider uses her A1, she will attack multiple times for each spiderling that does not have any buffs. So instead of it just being 1 AoE, it could be up to 5 AoE attacks, all of which will place the unblockable, irresistible poisons. So if you're going to remove the counterattack, that is a viable way, but you have to make sure that you kill those minions as quickly as possible. But that's a completely different type of team than the one we're going to be showcasing today. The good news here is that any boss encounter with minions is more susceptible to the HP burn debuff, because every time an HP burn ticks, it does damage to all enemies on the same team. So AoE HP burn is definitely the most effective way to deal with another spider, and after that, you just need to surround your team with a bunch of supports that can keep your team alive and functioning while you wait for the burns to do their job. So with that, let's take a look at the team that I run to beat the Nether Spider. So we have 2 cleansers on the team team, and I definitely recommend that you at least have 2 cleansers on your team. If you're starting out super early, then you might even want to bring 3, depending upon the speed and reliability of those cleanses. But we have Reliquary Tender in there, of course, 3-turn cooldown cleanse, AoE cleanse with the continuous heals, which is nice. But that also synergizes fairly nicely with Chuhanarok here, who I have in the lead spot, because her passive, whenever she takes her turn, she will remove 1 random debuff from all allies. But if they're under a continuous heal, she will remove 2 random debuffs. So we have 2 cleansers, one that's just doing it by taking a turn, and the other has it on a 3-turn cooldown. We have the AoE HP burn that we spoke about with Mordecai here, and he's nice because he is affinity friendly, because he just places it on an AoE. But this can also be Drexler Blood Twin if you want to go with the more tank and burn strategy, where you just wait for them to attack you, and then his passive can place the HP burns, which of course will definitely happen a lot because of all of the ally attacks that the Nether Spider will have, especially at the start of the fight. There's a very good chance that she just puts a burn on everyone at the start of the fight. Aside from that, we have Vogoth in the team. His passive is very, very handy because he's going to be healing everyone else whenever he takes damage, and you're going to take a lot of AoE damage. But more importantly, he's in a bolster set, which could be also a shield set, which just helps you take the brunt of the first set of damage from the poisons, because you cannot avoid that damage at all when the fight begins. And then the 5th slot is just a DPS. In this case, I selected Stultus Dragonbane because he is immune to poisons, and we'll see that a little bit in action, and he just reflects them back to the attacker. And so every time they try to put poisons on him, the minions are poisoning themselves, and the boss is poisoning herself as well. Granted, she takes a lot less damage from poison, so poisons are not really a reliable way of dealing damage to her. They can work, but it will take a very, very long time. Technically speaking, Stultus is primarily in there for wave clear DPS, and then he just does a little bit of damage against the boss once we get there. So this spot is extremely flexible. It could be another support, it could be another cleanser depending upon your needs, or it could be a more aggressive nuker style composition. So as you can see here, this is not a very fast team. Part of that is the waves take a while to get through because they are fairly annoying given the affinities and the champions we have on the team, but also just because we're waiting for HP burn to be the primary DPS form for the boss, it's just going to take some time for all the burns to take effect. So let's go ahead and run this. But yeah, unfortunately, with this rotation of the Doom Tower, there's 2 Duchesses on the initial wave here, and our nuker is Spirit, or is Force Affinity, so we can weak hit against Spirit, which can be very unfortunate. So we might be lucky with some good RNG on this run. And yeah, we were able to kill them quickly, but a lot of times, or some of the times, he will weak hit, and then we just have to wait for them to revive cycle and blah, 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 and it just takes more time. But it doesn't really affect the success of the run, it just makes it take a bit longer. One thing to note for AI overrides is that Mordecai, we don't use his turn meter manipulation ability on the A2 because 1, he will take damage from decreasing the turn meter, but also we don't want to decrease the turn meter of the minions because we want them to stay alive or take as many turns as possible so that they can burn the rest of our enemies. So you can see there, we're kind of tuning it such that we have HP burn placed on everyone. We have our cleansers going kind of near the top of the order just to reduce the amount of poisons that everyone else takes. And then from then on, you can just see we're kind of poison free for the most part. Reliquary Tender, whenever she can, she's in a relentless set. We'll go through the builds a bit later, but she'll cleanse whenever possible. And then every single time Chuhanarok takes a turn, she will remove all the poisons from our team. And ideally, she goes like there right before the boss goes. And you can see at the start of her turn, she's going to try and activate it. And she only activated the one on Chuhanarok because the rest of them have been cleansed already. So, like I said, this is going to take a while, 3 minutes or so, and some change. But the strategy, you can kind of see, it's basically there. We cleanse when we need to. We're protected. We're healing a little bit from all the AoE attacks from Vogoth. And then Stultus, you might notice, whenever he gets the chance, he will play reflect some of the poisons back on the minions and or back on the boss. So while we're waiting for this to finish, let's talk about some of the teams that can be a bit more aggressive and a little bit faster. And they're generally speaking centered around Geomancer. It's still kind of an HP burn comp, but you're taking advantage of the fact that his passive can reflect damage back to the boss whenever he's attacked, and you're going to take a lot of attacks from the big spider as well as the minions, so it can be a very fast way to deal with the boss. In order to make a composition like that work, you do need some form of protection. A lot of people favor block damage and or unkillable just because you're effectively immune from any and all the poison damage as well as the poison explosion damage. And then you will need some form of heal reduction. A very popular pairing is Geomancer and Venomage, because in that case you do actually want a lot of AoE attacks because you want the minions to counterattack as much as possible, assuming you're protected with the unkillable and or block damage. And then every time they attack, they're proccing Geo's passive, which is reflecting damage back to the boss. So those are the fastest teams that can deal with the Nether Spider, at least that I've seen in recent memory. So now that we're progressing a little bit further into the fight, you can see that eventually the Spiderlings will take enough turns that the counterattack will fall off. And once that happens, they will switch to ally protecting the the boss, and then eventually, you know, the boss will cycle back to the ally attack, respawn new spiderlings, because she always wants 4 out there, and then you'll get a fresh set of ally attacks. And that most certainly, that second ally attack, depending on whenever it happens, can be the most deadly. So once again, just make sure that you have a fairly reliable cleanser on your squad. 3-turn cooldown is ideal. Relentless sets work very well, and anything in between that can kind of help with that. If you don't have a Hanorok, of course you can run a Doom Priest. You won't get the 2 debuff removal, but you can still run a Doom Priest. She's healing you and cleansing 1 random debuff off, and you can put her also in a Relentless set, so every time she takes a turn, she's just removing more and more poisons, and it's a little bit more healing. So we're coming here to the end of the fight. A few more turns of burns and they should be down, and you can see basically the entire time we're relatively safe. We're not really at risk of dying, but even if someone did die, Reliquary Tender is in there because she does have a revive on her kit, in her kit, but we actually didn't need it for this particular squad. So there we go, just under 4 minutes in order to kill the Nether Spider, and this is again just more of the slow tank and burn strategy, but you can experiment. Check out other content creators. There are plenty of videos talking about the Geomancer block damage heal reduction style of composition. All right, let's run through the builds on the champions for this particular team, starting off with the lovely rare Reliquary Tender, one of my favorite rares in the game, in a Relentless set and a life set, believe it or not. One of the few times I've actually used that set in the game, but I digress. 62,000 on her HP, almost 3k on the defense, 242 on the speed, and then 411 on the resistance. Now, as I mentioned, majority of the poisons that you're going to be receiving in this fight cannot be resisted, so you definitely do not have to index into resistance. This is just because I've used her in other areas where the resistance is handy, so that's not mandatory for this particular fight. All she needs to be able to do is take as many turns as possible and keep cleansing for the team. Now, you might note that we didn't bring block debuffs. As I mentioned before, the poisons cannot be blocked, so the cleanser could be anyone with a cleanse on a 3-turn cooldown. Doesn't really matter who, but I opted for Reliquary Tender just because we get the continuous heals, because block debuffs effectively doesn't do anything in this particular fight. For the blessing, there's not that many options because of course she is a rare champion, but I went with Indomitable Spirit, which was when I used to use her in Faction Wars. It just had a chance of blocking the freeze that cannot be resisted from the Faction Wars boss, but I since swapped her out for a different champion, so that one's kind of irrelevant. I might have to rethink and see if there's a better blessing to put on her as a rare champion, but because I do use her primarily in PvE, we've gone down for the masteries into the offense and support tree. Offense tree, we're coming down here to end on the tier 6 of War Master, more damage against bosses, and the support tree, we're coming down the getting some HP. We don't really care about accuracy. We definitely want more a turn meter for the buffs. And honestly, these masteries are very, very old, and way back in the day, I used to care about her placing the weak version decrease attack on the A1, but since then I've gone to just build her in full resistance and not worry about that. So this mastery, Arcane Celerity, is definitely out of date because she doesn't have enough accuracy to land that, but I digress. Cycle of Magic is helpful. Again, you can cycle through your abilities a little bit quicker every once in a while. You can get back to the cleanse faster. Lower Steel, boosting her stats, and then Lasting Gifts, definitely a must pick up because you want to extend the duration of the continuous heals. Next up, we have Mordecai, who is arguably the best epic AoE HP burn champion because he's affinity friendly, so you can use him against any boss encounter or any fight encounter, and he's in a reflex with perception set. Of course, the AoE HP burn is on a 4-turn cooldown, so the reflex set helps it get closer to around, on average, a 3-turn cooldown, give or take. His total stats are as follows: 48,000 on the HP, 3k, 3,200 on the defense, 243 on the speed, and then 388 on the accuracy. In order to land your debuffs on the highest stage of Doom Tower Hard, you're going to need around 350 accuracy, so we're definitely above that. But if you're focusing, or if you're progressing through normal mode, the highest you're going to need is just 250 accuracy. For the blessing on Mordecai, I have a suspicion that this is kind of a relic of the past pre-rework state, where Chainbreaker was the only epic one that gave accuracy when you got to 4 stars. But since then, I just haven't had a reason to change it, and I think it kind of helps him a little bit. In like Centranos, you might remove a random debuff on him because he doesn't have resistance. But yeah, probably not the best one, but I haven't really been inspired to change it and spend the gems and whatnot. So for the masteries, pretty standard debuffer stuff. Offense tree, we're staying on the left-hand side, coming all the way down to War Master, of course, to deal damage against bosses. And the support tree, we're hugging the right-hand side, getting a lot of the accuracy boosting stuff, but pivoting back over to Cycle of Magic because just like the reflex set, we want him to cycle through his HP burn as quickly as possible. Lower Steel for extra stats, and then Master Hexer, of course, to extend the duration of said HP burns. Vogoth is next, and I did mention before that he is in a bolster set. Sadly, the only bolster set on my account because it is a fake set for us free-to-play players, but I digress. Immortal alongside it, and then protection through the accessories for a little bit of extra resistance and HP. So his total stats are as follows: 100,000 on the HP, but we trade that out because he is super slow at 174 speed, 2,700 on the defense. He doesn't need that much speed because he's kind of just a meat shield, and the more damage he takes, the more he heals everybody else, and so it doesn't really matter how many turns he gets. He doesn't really need to cycle through it. And then resistance 467 on the high side, just so he can kind of tank a little bit in the arena. This is more of an arena style build, but bolster is kind of useful everywhere, to be honest. And then accuracy 232, in case I need to use him in some areas. He has a little bit where he can provoke like a nuker and something in the arena who doesn't have a lot of resistance. For the blessing on him, again, because he's more of an arena champion for me, I just went with commanding presence, so he can boost to the power of our auras. And then for the masteries, again, more indexing into these arena style of things. You could easily go offense tree and come down to Giant Slayer for the triple hitter on the A1 and just deal more damage to bosses. But he is arena optimized, so we're focusing on the defense and support tree. We're picking up a lot of the healing masteries because, of course, he does a lot of healing in his kit. Lower steal for the extra stats. And the defense tree, a lot of the tankiness stuff. Selfless defender is very useful on him. Again, when he takes damage, he heals everyone else for some portion of that damage. So him taking more of the first hit is good because he's just a meat shield. And then bulwark, just to literally have ally protection basically built in to his kit through the mastery. And before we move on, I want to throw out one quick note because I do see this from time to time about people running reaction on their Vogoths. That kind of defeats the purpose of his passive, because the more damage he takes, the more he heals everyone else, and the less damage he takes, the less he heals everyone else. So reaction in his kit do not synergize at all whatsoever, so do not put him on there. You want him to take damage on behalf of other people, so save your reaction pieces for anyone else on the team if you're going to be using a Vogoth. Next up, we have Mighty Honorak, who is in double perception and stone skin, and she is built for nightmare level of Hydra, so we'll see that in the stats here. But 54,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, 280 on the speed, so super fast relatively speaking, and she is the first on the team, so she starts off by cleansing for the team. Full crit rate and a little bit of crit damage. I did rebuild her fairly recently after the Hydra changes to boost her damage, because she does a decent amount of damage, and her damage is based on defense, so that was why I reworked her. But high resistance, you can see there, 448, and then high accuracy, 345, so she can resist things that Nightmare Hydra puts out there. She's also one of the mischief tanks for the squad, and that will make a little bit more sense when you see the blessing. And then 345 is enough accuracy to land the debuffs on Doom Tower Hard as well as Nightmare level of Hydra. So the blessing, as I hinted to, is Lightning Cage, another buff on her so she can attract the Head of Mischief and be our mischief tank for the team, on top of always placing a continuous heal on herself when she does her A1. And then for the masteries, optimized for PvE, but the smattering of stuff on the support tree, we'll get back to that. But offense tree, beelining it straight down to War Master for extra damage as the T6. We want a little bit more health. We definitely want more healing because that does affect the continuous heals that she places. We want turn meter effects because she does buff, but she also does debuff, so we want both of those. Cycle of magic, just like everyone else, we want her to cycle through her abilities more and more. Lower steal for the extra stats, and then we have the split of Master Hexer and Lasting Gifts because she is both a buffer and a debuffer, and so she could extend the duration of both of those. And then lastly, we have my Stultus Dragonbane, who's technically in like a Doom Tower nuker build, but I also do flex him sometimes in the arena depending on the situation. He is in Savage and Perception, and his total stats are as follows: 52,000 on the HP, 5.8k on the defense, 210 on the speed, full crit rate, 245 on the crit damage, and then 372 on the accuracy. For the blessing on him, I opted for Soul Reap. That's kind of where I've settled in recent times, and it just helps kind of finish off some PvE content, some wave and stuff, a little bit of damage left over, or when he weak hits, certain Spirit Affinity champions, it might help finish them off, and so that's where I've kind of settled over the years. But he's been through many iterations of blessings over the years. And then for the mastery, is kind of like a nuker for the arena. He has enough accuracy in his kit, so I don't really need anything from the support tree. So the offense tree, definitely trying to make him hit as hard as possible. Opportunist, notably because he does have an AoE stun ability that is a double hitter, so you could stun on the first hit and deal more damage on the second hit if you place the stun, so kind of synergizing with his own kit. And then of course we're ending on Helm Smasher to maximize the amount of ignoring defense that he can do to maximize his damage potential. And then the defense tree, a little bit of survivability, Harvest Despair because he places stun, which can also place leeches, which can heal up him or other people on the squad. And then Retribution for the counterattacks. He is a defensive based nuker. So there you have it. This concludes the Raid Starter Pack episode for the Nether Spider. One thing I did forget to mention is that there are two different affinities of the Nether Spider. This one is the magic version. There's also a Spirit Affinity version on the Frost Spider rotation of the Doom Tower. But it seemed with this sort of style is agnostic to the affinity of the boss because cleansers don't really care because they're just going to cleanse off whenever they get their turns. And then Mordecai is affinity friendly when it comes to placing HP burn. But again, if you don't have him yet, you could still use Drexar Blood Twin, who doesn't really rely on affinity to place the burns. It's just when his when he's attacked with his passive. Nuker could be anyone, so ideally they would be magic affinity, so they would work on both forms or both affinities of the boss. And then Vogoth, once again, we're just using him for his passive, so it doesn't really matter what his affinity is. I remember very, very early on when Doom Tower was a new piece of content that this was one of the most frustrating fights, especially like I mentioned, the second set of ally attacks, which could just stack your team out with poisons, and then she takes a turn, pops them all, and everyone dies. So definitely want to index more into supports on this one, a little bit less on the damage, unless you can pull off one of those more aggressive Geomancer-centric compositions. So if you were struggling with a Nether Spider, hopefully this video helped you out, and if you're a veteran, maybe you have some inspiration for a better, more efficient, and or faster team. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and if you're enjoying the content on this channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button for more content just like this one, because I do plan to cover all of the Doom Tower bosses in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.